Hello! This week, I wanted to have a chat about some terrain. Now, I'm planning a few other boards for a few other games, so I figured I would start by talking about the board I actually already have. My Malifaux table. So, starting at the base, I use a Deep Cut Studios mats with the Malifaux markings. It's quite handy for some of the harder deployment zones to measure, as well as knowing where the center point is in the center lines, so you can sort of more secretly carry out your schemes. We used to play on a old-fashioned folding table I made, which only had the very center of the table marked, and it's much harder to do things secretly. So I certainly recommend upgrading to a mat with markings on it. Plus, this is much easier to transport than most old-fashioned boards, unless of course you're playing like the same club or store or in your house. You just don't need to actually move it anywhere, but unfortunately most of us do. Okay, so terrain. We run the gamut here over a few sort of generations of making. Obviously you got your big blocking pieces, your NDF laser cut boards. Having a bit of wearing at the moment, so I need to go back and do some touch-ups on them. But I think it adds some character at least. You got the little scatter that came with them, crates and like the little water troughs for the horses. Now, I'm not a big fan of having like individual crates stacked up. I find they get knocked around and moved a lot. So I always stick them on individual little spaces to make them more sturdy. Mine mostly have reed fences. Oh, see, much easier to make a bunch of these than just constantly buying NDF. As for larger area terrain, I'm a big fan of having sort of a base template. So we have plain ones for when you don't want it to affect movement, and in this case, because we have a sort of bayou themed, we have water ones for severe terrain. And into matching with that, I made these little reed platforms to act as sort of my pseudo version of a forest. There's also some rocks just for some alternative severe terrain. And I'm currently working on updating my graveyard terrain. So these are going to be like height 1 blocking. I don't know if to make them severe or not. We'll see how we go. Obviously you have the old trees, have to include these, as I do have them anyway. But originally I was using larger fish tank trees to really make some giant bayou trees, or something different. Now the one I'm really hard with is hazardous terrain. Now I mainly use these trapdoor spiders for hazardous poison, but given that this year I'm running one of my keywords being experimental, it feels a little self-serving always putting hazardous poison on, so we're going to make some additions to the board. Now I have my blood ritual circle. I've tried a few things on this one, having it be hazardous, injured, shielded, but that turned out a bit too good, so I think we'll just make it the generic hazardous for 1 damage. I'm also going to have some zombies bursting out of graves, so you can make these hazardous staggered. Everyone wants to check out the board, of course. And finally we'll make some barbed wire fences for hazardous injured. So that way we have 4 to choose from. So at the start of the game we can just flip a card, place one down based on the suit, and suddenly it's nice and fair. Now overall, obviously I don't use all this terrain on every table, but I do think it is generally a good mix of blocking, small scatter, larger pieces, cat. to make a big board. Now, then in my community, we tend to organise games, including pre-picking our masters and such, and doing a few pre-game things so we can meet up and get stuck into it. But this does lead to us not knowing what the table is, which I think is a bit of an important thing in especially some crews more than others. So my plan is I'm probably going to do a few arrangements of these, take some photos, so when I organise games I can be like, hey, send them a photo of like, this is the board I'll set up when we get there, and we have that information to work with. Give that a go for a couple months or so and see how it turns out. So I've also made up a list of all the terrain and all their characteristics. This is a bit out of date, so I need to go over it again, update it, especially for the new pieces I'm adding. But it'll be printed out and it'll live in the box, so everything has assigned heights and characteristics, and I can just hand it to my opponent and they can just see everything, and we don't need to go through every piece of terrain and work out what's what. A very handy piece. I know not everyone's going to do it, but it is good to have on hand. But yeah, so this is my Malifaux board setup. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions about how I made any of this terrain, feel free to drop a comment and I'll see if I can answer it. Or if it's a bit more complicated, maybe I'll make a video making some more of it. But for now, it's me, Captain Steel, signing out.